And so we are on the home stretch with 2019. And a lot of people know that the day after Thanksgiving is referred to as Black Friday. Some people may not know that the reason they call it that is because most retailers are operating in the red. They're actually losing money all the way until the Friday after Thanksgiving because Christmas shopping starts. And the amount of revenue that they generate between Thanksgiving and Christmas actually puts them in the black. And nonprofits are very similar to that, which is why I think in recent years they've done the Giving Tuesday. But it's definitely the case for us. We're doing a year-end fundraiser this year for Into the Harvest because right now we are operating at a deficit. We're in the red. That's not uncommon, so I don't want you to be worried. But we do rely on generous year-end gifts to make our annual budget to finish in the black. And so we're asking you guys that if you've been encouraged by Into the Harvest in 2019, if you understand what we're trying to do, you believe in it, you want to see it continue and grow in 2020, then we ask that you would consider making a special year-end gift to help us finish the year in the black, finish on budget, and start 2020 on solid footing. So we're calling this Finish Strong 2019. And there's a link in the video description here. You can also just go to our website, and you'll probably be hearing more about that in the coming weeks on social media. But we really appreciate you guys. We love the community that God is building, and we hope you'll help us keep it going. Well, I am joined today by Glen Scrivener. He lives in Eastbourne, England, with his wife Emma and his daughter Ruby. He's an evangelist and a director at Speak Life. He's also the author of several books, including 321, The Story of God, the World, and You, and his new book, The Gift, What If Christmas Gave You All You Ever Wanted. Glen is passionate about people meeting Christ and equipping Christians to share their faith. Glen, thanks for being with us today.
So great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we fought through some time zone challenges and some technical difficulties here to get started, but we're off and running.
Great. So. It's a great age to live in that we can actually, have these difficulties and surmount them. It's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually came across you. I was looking this up. I think the first time your name came across my radar was back in 2015, about this time 4 years ago, and I saw that someone had retweeted a statement from you that Christians believe in the virgin birth of Jesus and materialists believe in the virgin birth of the cosmos. And you just left us with a question: choose your miracle.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, choose your miracle, but you really can't get around it. So I was intrigued by that, and then over the last few years, I've had a chance to get more exposed to what you're doing there. I love it, but why don't you start off by just telling us a little bit more about your story of faith and how God brought you to where you are today?
Great. Well, I grew up in Australia, and it was a church-going home, but it didn't make a lot of sense to me because I think I thought that there was a large God out there who was pretty much indistinguishable from Zeus. And if you were a good boy, then you would want to give your life to this being. And I did that in my teenage years. I gave my life to Jesus 1,000 times. And I don't think that's an exaggeration. I think every night from about the age of 13 to about the age of 18, I would give my life to God in ever more melodramatic ways and never really feel like he'd accepted me. And when I left home, therefore, I figured God didn't want me, so I don't want him. So let's try and have as good a time as I can without God. And I tried to do that. And I guess, the elder brother became the prodigal son from Luke 15. And so went away to university. I was in England by that stage. Our family had moved when I was about 15 years old. And so I was at university, and I was doing all the things that university students do in order to get free. But I always say it's very interesting in Luke chapter 15. The difference between being free and being lost is not very easily discernible. If you think you want independence from home, You might want to describe that as freedom. Jesus would probably call that being lost. And I think I was lost during my university years. But a friend of mine asked me to read the Gospels with him. And so I read through, and it was blowing my mind, really, because I had a picture of God who was this distant individual, high on power, low on personality. And then I was being confronted by the person of Jesus, who is interesting, who is so compelling, who has towering love and stooping humility, and just he walked off the pages of Scripture, really. And I started to see that he was Lord, really. And one of the big turning points for me was getting to the Garden of Gethsemane as I read through the Gospels with this friend of mine, because the Garden of Gethsemane in my teenage years had been a passage that haunted me, because what I thought was Jesus is in that garden giving his life to God in a melodramatic way. So what should I do? What did Jesus do? So I should do what he did. And so really my whole philosophy of giving my life up to God again and again was based on the Garden of Gethsemane. So aged about 21, my friend was challenging me to read through the Gospels, and I got to the Garden of Gethsemane, and I said, I can't handle this passage. It's too much to pray like Jesus prayed. And my friend was very wise. He just said, Glenn, do you think you're Jesus? And I said, not in every regard, obviously, but he said, Glenn, you're nothing like Jesus. You are not Jesus in this story. In the story of the Garden of Gethsemane, you are Peter. And what's Peter doing? Failing, stupid, selfish, sleeping Peter. And Jesus prays for him. And that was pretty revolutionary. That was, oh, okay. So it's not about my life given to God. It's about Christ's life given for me. And the grace of Christ just turned my life right side up from that moment on. And so from about the age of 21, I really got to see it's about Jesus, and it's about his life given for me. And that totally liberated me and transformed me. And I started shooting my mouth off about Jesus from that point onwards. And pretty soon I found myself working for churches and just doing very basic jobs, just cleaning churches and just being around Christians and being around Christian ministers. And I guess I've been working for churches for the last 19 years, but the whole thread that has sort of drawn all those passages of my life together has been, I love Jesus and I want to introduce other people to him.
Yeah, a lot of our listeners are based out of the U.S. I mean, we've got some U.S. citizens who are scattered around the world, but I would estimate that 80% of our audience are familiar with U.S. culture and society. As someone who grew up in Australia and now has spent a few decades in England, give us an idea of what your sense of the state of culture is in those parts of the world, other parts of the world. Is there an openness to faith? Is there a real hardness to that? What do you experience as you live and share your faith?
I'll speak about the UK more because that's where I've been living for the last 20 years. But I think the UK is notionally, church and state are on top of each other, in that the Church of England is, the state religion, in that there are bishops in the upper houses, in the upper house of our parliament, in that the Queen is the governor of the Church of England. So notionally, the UK is a very religious society. In practice, we are utterly secular. Which I think is the total reverse of the States. In the States, the philosophy is that church and state never the twain shall meet. In practice, you're a deeply religious country. And I've got someone I know very well. I was about to call him a friend. I wouldn't exactly call him a friend, but we don't know each other that well. But Tim Farron is a well-known politician over here in the UK. He led the Liberal Democrat Party, which is the sort of third main party in the UK. And he's always saying, in America, you have to pretend to have a faith in order to get on in politics. And in the UK, you have to pretend not to have a faith in order to get on in politics. It's a very secular country. And yet at the same time, you have incredible opportunities in schools, for instance, because schools have not been a battleground of freedom of religion in the same way that they have been in the States. So I get to go into schools and teach from the Bible on a regular basis. Wow. Just your regular public schools in the UK are meant to have daily acts of worship in them. And, only now are people starting to really push back against prayers in schools and that sort of thing in the UK. So that is an opportunity. That's an open door. In terms of campus ministry, I go around to universities. I'm able to get onto campuses and preach with great freedom in a way that my American friends say that, I wouldn't be able to do half the things that we get away with here in the UK. So there are opportunities, but I mean, the UK is extremely secular. About 5%, 5 to 8% are sort of church going on a regular, weekly basis in the UK. So that's much lower than the States. But at the same time, that lack of knowledge about basic Christian things is also an opportunity. We get to start from square one, and we can sidestep a lot of the religious questions because people's experience is less of, what Christians actually believe. And we can start from square one and present Jesus in a refreshing way, we hope. But that's some of the difference.
Yeah, one thing I really appreciated about both your books that I've been able to read so far, both 321 and The Gift, is you do something very Jesus-esque, which is you use a lot of analogies and parables that people are familiar with, whether they have a faith background, a religious background, or otherwise, to try and articulate and to give insights into truths, gospel truths that we find in Scripture. So it's something I really appreciate. And I think that's part of what we want to see happen too, is helping modern day believers communicate an ancient faith in the modern age that we live in. Jesus did that. He communicated the truth of the kingdom in ways that were relevant and that made sense to the people of his time.
Yeah, well, just Google "the kingdom of heaven is like ... and you'll see how much Jesus loves analogies. I was just reading the other day, Jesus says, "I'm sending you out as sheep among wolves, so be wise as serpents and as innocent as doves." He's got 4 animals, right? in the space of one breath. He's mixing his metaphors. And you're like, yeah, he's allowed to. Yeah.
Well, tell me a little bit. I do want to dive into this new book that just came out, The Gift, which I think would be a great thing for folks to not only read, but also share. But before we dive into that, I do want to ask you about Speak Life itself. And you've been working with that particular organization now for going on 10 years. How did that come about? And what is the mission of Speak Life?
Thank you. Well, so I started working 10 years ago. I'm only the second evangelist to be employed by this evangelistic ministry. The founder got it going in 52 and died in 82. And so there was a long sort of hiatus until I came in 2010. And really what was wonderful about it is I could come into this evangelistic ministry that already had a constitution that said we exist to see revival in Great Britain through proclamation and media. And that was fascinating because back in the day, Eric Hutchings, the founder, he had a big radio program and he had a magazine that went out there that was very evangelistic. That was his media. And then he went around preaching. And these days, I spend a lot of my time going around preaching. But these days, the media is different. These days, the media is podcasts and YouTube videos and books and courses and that sort of thing. So thankfully, we're able to kind of keep the legacy going. And these days, we do that by preaching around the country, by training Christians in how to share their faith, and through evangelistic media that hopefully equips Christians so that on their Facebook pages they can share something that's a little bit more meaningful than Charlie bit my finger and cat videos and sneezing pandas. So we hopefully can produce some evangelistic media that Christians like, and then what you like, you share, and out it goes. So it's this twofold ministry of preaching and media. We also run an internship in which people can join us for 10 months and you go, you come away with me on mission. So we go preaching together. We go, we learn together from the scriptures, and we produce evangelistic resources together, which we hope bless the church and reach the world.
Yeah, I just caught one of your videos this past week about there was a dragon in the Nativity. Did you guys just produce that one?
Yeah, it just came out a few days ago. So yeah, it'll be out on Facebook as well tomorrow night. So yeah, just one of the many sort of resources that we try to make. Christmas is a wonderful time for reaching out, and we find that Christmas videos and books as well are ways that you can really share the gospel.
Well, tell me a little bit about this book that just came out, The Gift, which is a very readable. It's not a long book. It's very to the point, but it's posing the question, what if Christmas gave you all you ever wanted? And I really enjoyed this, but where did the idea of taking gift giving as a lens to help us understand the nature of God and even our own experience of humanity, what it means to be human? You take this one idea of gift giving, which is very front and center during Christmas, and then you use that to really unpack the gospel. So where did that story come from for you?
Maybe it began with Kelly Kapich's book, God So Loved the World, He Gave, which is a tremendous book that I am often recommending to other people. It's really just a meditation on John 3:16, and it gets into all sorts of Trinitarian depths, and that sort of got the cogs whirring a few years ago. Peter Lightheart's written some really great stuff on giving and receiving. And yeah, it's really gotten me to think that when you give a gift, you're not just giving a third thing. It's like there's a recipient, and then there's this thing in between you. Actually, you're kind of giving yourself, if it's a good present. I mean, if it's Amazon vouchers, then it's it's not a particularly meaningful gift. But if you have thought about something, you saw it in April, and you knew in April that you wanted to give it for Christmas, that kind of gift, you put yourself into it, and it communicates something of you, it communicates something of them. And if they love it, then they feel known, they feel seen, they feel loved. And actually, gift giving is at the heart of life. We say that love is the greatest thing, but it's hard to imagine love without some kind of self-giving that's going on. And why would that be so? Well, maybe John 3:16 is true. We have it on good authority that God so loved that he gave. And so therefore these relationships of give and take, of reciprocity, that back and forth is something that goes very deep. It's the greatest thing in life to be involved in a give and take and a back and forth. And then with biblical eyes on, with biblical spectacles, you start to see, life is like that because God is like that. And so you start thinking about all these scriptures where Jesus says, the Father loves the Son and has placed everything in his hands. Or you think of John 17, verse 24. That was John 3:35. And John 17:24 is, Father, you loved me from before the foundation of the world. And of course, the gift of the Spirit has been filling the Son from all ages. So the very nature of God is that in the triune life, there is back and forth, give and take. There is sharing. There is gift at the heart of all reality. So theologically, that's what I'm thinking. And then evangelistically, what I'm thinking is, let's start with the experience of Christmas. Let's start with what you love about Christmas Day. And, we love giving gifts. We love receiving gifts. And let's try and take people by the hand and say, why is this so fundamental? Why is this so profound? Why do you seem to resonate with this? Could it be that this is the glory that is humming throughout the cosmos? Could it be? And I just want to draw people increasingly to that vision of life.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. One thing that you did, I think, a great job of is highlighting that life itself is a gift, which, as you get going through the busyness of your daily routine, your weekly routine, 2019, here we are, it's almost over. which probably most of us would say, yeah, it seems like, where did it go? And yet, if you take a step back, life is amazing just to be alive. And we all acknowledge that creation itself, the world, and even many of the experiences, even the mundane experiences of life, there's a beauty, there's a joy to these things.
Mm.
And yet, on the other hand, we know that there's something broken about the world. There's evil. There are things that aren't as they should be. And then when we introspect, we realize that, hey, that's true of me too. That there are experiences that I have where I am giving, but then there's a side of me that's very much about using people and trying to take from others to find life, which again sort of creates this bifocal vision on the goodness that points us to God and this higher order, and at the same time the flaws and brokenness in our world and in ourselves that point us to the idea that something's not as it should be. Right. So how did you go about working that into the book, and how do you go about trying to share that with others?
Part of it is from a conversation I had with an atheist a few years ago. I was at Oxford. I was speaking to a whole bunch of students, and there was this 19-year-old kid who came forward after I spoke, and he, he was trying to school me in a few things, and in the way that 19-year-old guys sometimes do, especially if they go to Oxford. But he started talking about things like, what about Old Testament wars? And I said, well, that's interesting. You have a standard of warfare that is sort of supratemporal that you can apply, to things that happened 3,000 years ago. He said, oh, yeah, that's just a given. I'm like, okay, that's interesting. And then we started talking about, he was like, well, obviously materialism is true. Like atheism is just, we are just matter in motion. And I'm like, well, that's interesting because you and I, we are minds relating to each other. And, I have a consciousness, you have a consciousness, and through language and reason and rhetoric and emotion, we're having this back and forth. And what do you notice about everything I just mentioned? They are thoroughly immaterial. It seems like the most basic stuff of life is mind and meaning and morals and music and maths and all these things, which are totally immaterial. He says, yeah, but those are just givens. I was like, oh, okay, givens. And he kept using this word, givens. And, at the end of my conversation, I just said, ever wonder who the giver is? You take everything for granted. Do you ever wonder who the giver is? And it's just true. Everything that we experience in life is a given. Will we allow those gifts to lead us to the giver? But then there is absolutely the problem of evil, and there's the problem of suffering. And what do we do with that? Actually, another time I was in Oxford, I was debating the chief executive of the British Humanist Association, Andrew Copson. He's a great friend of Richard Dawkins. And we were debating, is God worthy of worship? And his opening 10-minute remarks were entirely taken up with parasites. And he just said, there's this parasite that does this horrible thing, and there's this parasite that does this nasty thing, and there's this parasite and this parasite. 10 minutes of this. And then he said, loving God, I think not. And then sat down. And so what do I say? So in the rebuttals, I just got up and I said, well, let's think about parasites a little bit more. What is a parasite? The story of a parasite is this. You have an original life-giving good thing, and then secondarily, you have this other thing called a parasite that latches onto the original life-giving good thing and sucks the life out of it, right? You've just narrated the Christian story then, that in the beginning, there was a giver. In the beginning, there was love. In the beginning, there was light. But we have fallen. There has been this secondary thing called evil that is perverted God's good intentions for this world. And actually, every example we can point to about what's gone wrong with the world is an example of something that's originally good that goes wrong. Parasites suck the life out of an original life-giving good thing. Death is parasitic on life. Disease is parasitic on health. When relationships break down, it's because a good relationship has been twisted and perverted. It has fallen, shall we say. So the biblical story just matches up perfectly with our experience of the world, that even the evil we feel actually points to an original good. So
Right.
we explore that in the book.
Yeah, I love it. There was one particular. I don't want to give away the whole book because I hope people will pick this up and check it out for themselves. But there was one particular story that you tell about um, a student, a science student in the lab who's been given a plant,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
and so she spends months basically breaking down the material composition of this plant to determine what is it. Using all of the tools of science to try and discern what this object is that's been given to her.
Yeah.
And turns out that it was a rose that was given to her by, I guess, someone who was interested in her.
Right.
It had a
On
meaning.
Valentine's Day. He gave it to
Yeah,
her on Valentine's Day. And
right.
she was ignorant of the meaning of the rose. And
And
so
it's
she just examined its genome. Right.
exactly. So, trying to make sense of life and trying to make sense of the most deep questions of life
Mm.
while limiting ourselves to just the scientific process um, leaves so many things off the table in terms of understanding what's
Yeah.
real, what's true. So that was a great
And that
analogy.
circles around to what you say about analogies, because I'm always talking about Betty the botanist, which is this example that's from 321, my first book. And yeah, you put yourself, you tell the story about Betty the botanist, and Gareth the lab assistant has given her a long stem rose, and all she is doing is mapping its genome and thinking that she's the cleverest person on earth. Betty is a moron. Right? Like, she's she's very clever about
Right.
that rose on one level. On another level, she doesn't understand the first thing about the meaning of the rose. And this is what's great about using analogies. You immerse someone in the story, they understand who the characters are, and then you say, I think you're Betty in this conversation. I think you might be. I was in a great conversation. We went on till midnight last week. I was in Bath University in England, and the conversation went on till midnight. And these guys kept on. I kept on pointing out, look, your materialism does not account for minds and maths and morals and meaning and all these sorts of things. And they said, okay, that's fine, but we can do matter in motion, and isn't that great? And every time I kind of brought up the fact that minds might be important, might be important, they were like, but that's just you with your God of the gaps. You're just trying to insert God into the gaps in our knowledge. And I'm like, no. That's like Betty saying, okay, if I keep on looking into the genome, I will discover the romantic message behind the rose. Like, no, this is not a God of the gaps. This is the God of the whole show that you need to look up and
Right.
see. So that's another example of how you can use analogies to immerse people in the story and get them to see the world in a different light.
Yeah, you've got so many of those in both of these books. So tell me a little bit more. This book just came out. The Gift just came out. I picked it up on Amazon for Kindle. What are your hopes for this particular book that you would want to share with our audience?
Just a little bit about Frank.
Yeah,
So
sorry.
yeah, I think my hope, no worries at all. I think my hope for the book, it is short, as you say, and deliberately so. I've written about 5 or 6 of these short little books that are the sorts of things that people might actually read. You give people a book that's 200 pages, much I'll give it a go. And maybe they'll do what I do with books is I'll read the first chapter, give it 30 pages and see. I mean, if you give The Gift 30 pages, you may as well press on to the end. So I think it's a book that I hope Christians will read and then pass on to non-Christian friends. And then afterwards say, well, what did you make of it? I hope it's a gift that gets used as a stocking filler, as a present that you can give to non-Christian friends and family members. And I also really hope that it gets used in churches. We've produced a video to go alongside the gift. So that's something that you can use in your church service. We make available all our branding, all the sort of elements to the book cover and the video, so that you can, make your whole PowerPoint slide presentation exactly like the gift. And you could do a gift themed Christmas outreach if you liked. And lots of churches are buying, boxes of 100. I just today heard of a church buying 2,000 copies copies of the gift at all their carol services and that sort of thing. So I hope the book gets used in all of the above ways. And already I'm giving the book out to friends, and I'm saying, what's the earliest Christmas present you've had? Is November too early? And they have a laugh, and then I sort of give them the book. Yeah, it's the kind of giveaway book that it's long enough that you can actually communicate something of the beauty of Jesus, and it's short enough that people will actually read it. So I have high hopes that this could do some great good for the gospel.
Yeah, I think it will, brother. I really appreciate you writing it. Is the best place, where would be the best place for people to go if they wanted to? I mean, I went to Amazon for the book, but it sounds like you have some other resources that are available to folks.
Yeah, if people, I wrote it with The Good Book Company as the publisher, and thegoodbook.com. You can find the gift there, or if you're in the UK, thegoodbook.co.uk, and people can find it there.
Well, Glenn, I know we got a little bit of a late start, and I know you have a hard out here, so I wanna be honoring of your time. But I really appreciate you joining us today, and we're gonna try to do this again sometime next year. Maybe dive into 321, which I thought was an outstanding book. I hope folks will check that out as well. But Merry Christmas!
Love to do this again. Yeah,
awesome. Merry Christmas in advance, and thanks for being with us today.
Thanks so much, Andrew. God bless.